61% of enterprise environments run hybrid deployments, while 32% take hours becoming aware of their production problems. Yet organizationally, they're increasingly relying on multiple open source technologies like Cassandra, Kafka, and PostgreSQL for business critical applications. And this creates a dangerous gap between infrastructure complexity and readiness. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm the principal analyst and practice lead for the AppDev practice at the Cube Research. And I'm joined by Ben today. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. Well, Ben, why don't you introduce yourself, Instaclustr, and NetApp?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ben Slater. I'm the VP and General Manager for the Instaclustr product at NetApp. Instaclustr is a product all about helping people run open source software for high reliability and high levels of scale. So we specialize in a small set of software. You mentioned Apache Cassandra, Apache Kafka, Postgres, also OpenSearch, and Cadence Workflow, some of the key applications that we offer. And we have a managed platform, which makes it really easy, and we take care of all of the operations for you. You can spin up a cluster, within minutes and have it production ready, as well as enterprise support where you're running the environment yourself, which some people require, and consulting around all of those things as well.
Well, it's definitely super exciting because it really is relevant. We see a lot of organizations, Ben, they're really racing towards modernizing their application infrastructure here, right? But they're increasingly adopting specialized open source technologies like the ones we were talking about, like Cassandra, or for distributed databases, or Kafka for data streaming, or PostgreSQL, SQL for relational databases, right? But OpenSearch is also used for search and analytics. So those are the ones that you mentioned. But here's where the challenge really runs into. Most enterprises really don't have the in-house expertise to manage these technologies at scale. They run into areas where they really cannot provide the 24/7 monitoring and support, and they look for that hiring specialized engineering. It's both difficult and it's expensive. So we're seeing, according to our research, Ben, that 68% of organizations, they really want to work with vendors that sponsor open source initiatives, but the majority of them want to only really work with vendors that provide enterprise level support for these open source initiatives. So they don't want to go at it alone because they don't want to own it at the end of the day. But they do want to work with those vendors that support it. And at the same time, 61% are running hybrid deployments and need infrastructure flexibility and not vendor lock-in. This is where I in our briefing, in our conversations, in our discussion, this is where I see platforms like Instaclustr really coming together to provide fully managed services for those multiple open source technologies across cloud, on-prem environments, as well as enterprise level SLAs, really without having that proprietary lock-in. And it's not really the question about using open source, because that's really what most organizations are using. It's how to manage it responsibly at scale. So Ben, let's jump right into it. We see that the two areas that organizations run into challenges is complexity and skill gap issue. And then when we looking at open source, the expertise gap is a real thing. Organizations want the flexibility, they want to have the cost benefits of open source technologies, but they lack the in-house expertise to manage it, as we were talking about. So how do you think, using these open source technologies, how do enterprise struggle, or why do they struggle with managing open source technologies in-house? And what are the risks associated with technologies supporting business critical applications?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think the key thing to keep in mind with open source, if you just, go to the project and download the open source application and start using it, seems great. It's all free, will probably work really well for a while. If that's the mode that you're using it in, then you've taken on the responsibility to sort out any issues yourself, whether that's a bug in the software or just working out an operational issue. There's no one there with an obligation to help you. Most likely, if you log a bug with the project or post on the mailing list, somebody will probably help you, but they're not going to be bought in. They're certainly not going to be on any kind of critical response SLA or any of those types of things. So if you've then taken that on responsibility yourself, that means that you really need people who a level of expertise to be able to dive into the code of these complex distributed systems figure out where the bugs are, fix those, figure out what the implications for the way the code works are for how you operate it. And that level of expertise is really hard to maintain, unless you're at a very large scale. And that's where organizations like Instaclustr can come in to really help, because we can maintain that level of expertise, because we're servicing many customers. We have committers in these projects on our staff. We have operators who've spent 10 years doing nothing but operate Apache Cassandra. And so it gives you access to that level of expertise that's beyond what you could ever maintain in your own environment, unless you're a huge environment.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge advantage. I mean, what I'm seeing in our research is 67% of organizations are hiring generalists or specialists, not because they can't find, not because they don't want to hire specialists, they just can't find them. And they're really just looking at it. So I think it's a huge advantage. But let's talk about multi-technology support and eliminating that vendor sprawl, because organizations are looking to adopt, microservices and cloud native architectures. They need to have multiple specialized data sources and stores and streaming technologies, right, across their ecosystem. And having open source in an open ecosystem is important to many organizations. So managing these through separate vendors creates operational complexity, fragmented relationships, and also, just issues around the skill gap, as we talked about. But platforms can also manage multiple open source technologies like Cassandra, Kafka, Postgres, OpenSearch, and others. I mean, it really is, a way for the unifying of the operations, but also the SLAs that are put in place to reduce complexity while enabling organizations to really help expand their technology stack as they evolve. So Ben, when I think about this, I think about it in the context of how does multi-technology platforms really help support or reduce operational complexity compared to managing separate vendors, for things like Cassandra, Kafka, Postgres, and others. Like, how does that help?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's definitely an advantage that a lot of our customers see with working in Instaclustr. And I think, it starts right back in the buying process. You're only negotiating one contract. You're increasing the volume of business that you're bringing to the organization, so you can get more discounts from volume discounts. But I think that's just the start. Then once you get into actually operating, you have a consistent user interface, a consistent console, consistent Terraform provider in our case, or APIs to integrate with across all of the technologies and across all of the hyperscalers. And then probably most importantly, just a consistent way of working with your vendor. You know what their response times are going to be, who their account manager is that can escalate things, and there is one person to talk to. More, you're a bigger customer across that all of the different technologies, so that you have sort of more leverage to get interest from the vendor to fix things, and just can generally have a consistent way of working across all of the technologies that you're having to have managed through this arrangement.
Yeah. So it's the one back to path approach, which you basically have that really kind of easy way to reduce the levels of kind of barriers or road bumps or roadblocks to kind of get through. But let's kind of pivot a little bit and talk about why true open source really does matter, right? And avoiding that proprietary lock-in. Many managed service providers, they offer proprietary versions of open source technologies. And it really helps that what it does, that creates vendor lock-in, right? Because it's a proprietary version of the open source technology. Even though it is open source, organizations are still looking to use platforms that really do deliver a true open source version without modifications, right? Because if they want to, as well as I do, that developers like to use their bespoke solutions. So if they're using a specific environment, or if they have a vendor lock-in or open source technology that's carved up in a proprietary way, it may not work. So the flexibility does protect against that lock-in, but it also maintains cost and innovation benefits for open source, right? So that's a big factor. But let's talk about the difference between what managed services that use proprietary versions of open source technologies versus those that use or deliver true open source, and why does this matter for long-term flexibility?
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, we often talk about open source, saving licensing cost by using open source. But for me, actually, the bigger picture is more what I would call strategic flexibility. I think part of the reason we have seen much more use of open source over the last decade, 20 years even, is applications have just become a much more important part of everybody's business. Many business owners are their applications, their IT environment is the business. But even if that's not the case, it's still a vital part of pretty much every modern business. And if you're using a proprietary application, whether that's 100% proprietary or open source with a bit of proprietary around the side, you're then beholden to somebody else for what is really a key strategic part of your business. Whereas if you have adopted, real true open source and particularly community-backed or community-backed open source, then you know that you're not locked in, beholden to anybody else. You have the community will evolve the open source in a way that serves its users. And even if that doesn't work, you still maintain the ultimate fallback of taking the source code yourself, forking the source code and continuing to run it as you have been, if that's the thing that you need for the strategy of your business. So, it's really, to me, about strategic flexibility, and, that requires that you're really using 100% open source.
Yeah, and you're in the driver's seat, right? That's good. What it comes down to is you control your destiny. I'm getting ready to go to KubeCon EU pretty soon, and there's a lot of projects that the maintainers have kind of end of life, and there's some discussion around this, and but the open source code is available, so the people can't own it, and there's a difference between kind of an entitlement of these projects being used. These projects need to be available, so if things do go end of life, you can take it and run with it because it is truly open. So I agree with that. Infrastructure and application portability comes up a lot, especially in hybrid environments. So when we look at this, what I find is, in our research, is 20% of organizations indicate that application portability is critical, and 67% say that it's very important to their environment. So with hybrid environments representing about 61% of the current infrastructure models and cloud repatriation becoming common, a lot of organizations are trying, or they really need a platform that supports multi-cloud, on-prem flexibility, right? To be able to move the application for whatever reason, that's development or whatever it may be. But the ability to migrate workloads across different hyperscalers, AWS, Azure, GCP, and on-prem, it really is, an important dynamic for many organizations. And this is without changing the management of the platform. So having that holistic view and supporting the infrastructure strategy, it really does protect against the hyperscaler lock-in. So I guess with that said, how does infrastructure portability and the ability to move workloads, the application portability from cloud to on-prem, support the evolving business strategy or enterprise strategies, especially in the context of hybrid deployments or cloud repatriation? Do you agree with the numbers that I shared with my research, or is that different?
Yeah, look, I think that aligns with our experience in the market. I think one of the things we've seen, the term multi-cloud has been around for a while, but really there are very, very few workloads where a workload is spread across multiple clouds. Typically a workload runs on a cloud. But what we see is customers that, again, for that strategic flexibility, perhaps want to run different workloads on different clouds, so they have that negotiating power with the hyperscaler. We also see customers that need to bring their application to each of the clouds because that's where their end customers are, similar to us, running across multiple clouds to meet wherever our customers are. Finally, just people who need to keep the flexibility, who want to be able to say to their hyperscaler when the annual or contract negotiations come around, we could move this thing next month, and have that be a credible threat. You need to be conscious of how you build your application to maintain that as a credible bargaining chip, and to keep your cloud costs manageable, whether you're moving to a different hyperscaler or moving back on-prem. That is a bargaining chip you absolutely want to keep your hyperscaler costs reasonable.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm seeing that FinOps is having a reassert awareness across many organizations now, that basically cloud costs getting more in control, but having the ability to move your environment is critical. We also see this has to balance between enterprise grade operations, bridging the gap between speed and reliability too, right? What we see in our research is 32% of enterprises are taking hours to become aware of production problems, while only 17% achieve near real-time visibility. And organizations really need a platform that provides that, the 99.9 plus SLAs for that 24/7, 365 monitoring for proactive alerting, security compliance, whether it's, you name it, whichever compliance, but also CVE management and performance optimization. So these capabilities are really bridging the gap between the speed of open source innovation and the reliability requirements for business critical applications. So when we look at this, Ben, we think about it in the context of what does the enterprise operation really need for open source technologies, and how do the capabilities like 24/7 monitoring, security compliance, and 99.9% SLAs really address operational visibility gap that we're seeing in the market, because it really is a problem right now.
Yeah, look, I think, and one of the ways I look at it is when you're thinking about time to market for a new project, getting to that first release is one milestone, but then getting to the point where you actually have a reliable system which meets those SLAs, and a team around it that knows how to respond to issues and make sure it stays reliable is a lot longer beyond that first release. And that's really where an organization offering like Instaclustr can help, because we've had that experience. We've been doing this for 10 years or more. We have all of those learnings baked into the way our system works, the way our team works. We're learning all the time from all of our customers, not just from an individual customer. So able to bring all of those things you talked about, the monitoring and those things, already production proven, already running as a slick and settled system, and bring them straight away to your production requirements, so that when you actually hit that production release milestone, you're running already on a proven operational baseline that can meet all of those very high level requirements, rather than having to learn in production, which is just inevitable with any new system.
So Ben, it sounds like you made a comment there I want to kind of double click on. Speaking of proven, you're a proven technology, right? Because you've been around for a while doing this. But can you share some examples of how customers have expanded or managed one or more technologies and multiple technologies, and their trust and needs and how they've evolved over time? I mean, you've been doing this a bit. I'd love to hear that perspective.
Yeah, sure. Look, it is pretty common for us to see customers start with one technology, have a particular problem that they, perhaps one type of technology they're having problem managing, and then once they get comfortable with and they see what a good job we can do with that, expanding to other technologies that we have available on the platform. Cassandra, Apache Cassandra is actually the technology that we started with, and so the one that we're probably best known for in the market, and typically where people often will start. And Cassandra, is a technology that you really only use if you have the highest levels of requirements for scale, reliability, 24/7, sort of always on there. So that's the way our whole business is structured, around meeting those kind of requirements. And people who are using Cassandra for a requirement like that typically also need their other technologies to run that way. So it's very common to see someone say, well, you're doing such a great job of Cassandra. We also have Kafka as part of this overall application stack. Let's bring them together and get that same level of support and reliability across all of our technologies.
Ben, we discussed a lot today. So I'd love for you to kind of provide the audience with some insights on where they could go to learn more if they want to take the next steps.
Yeah, so instaclustr.com, Instaclustr without an E, is the best place to go. That you can find a lot of information there. We have a lot of technical blogs deep diving into how to use some of these technologies, even how parts of the platform work, as well as you can sign up for a free trial or get in touch with us to get a demo or talk through what the offering is.
Ben, great having you on. Your insights are really, really spot on. I think it's important for the audience to understand this and their choices, and they can figure out what they do, but it gives them something to think about here, right? So I think it's really, really great. Thanks for being on. Thanks for being my guest today. And a big thank you to all of you who've tuned in. We really do appreciate you being part of the AppDevANGLE community. But for now, that wraps up this episode, and we'll be back next Wednesday with another conversation diving into the tools, trends, and talents shaping the future of application development. So whether you're deploying at the edge building with AI, or modernizing your cloud stack, we've got you covered. Be sure to follow us on social if you have any thoughts, questions, or just want to connect. Until next time, stay curious and stay building.